Irena Cubìrkovà was the third woman to be executed in Czechoslovakia after 1918 for criminal offenses. She murdered her husband in October 1951 and her friend in December 1964. She was the mother of 7 children. She carried out both murders with perfect preparation and in the case of her husband's murder after several attempts. In the afternoon of December 9, 1964, while a passenger train was running on the Trnava-Bratislava line in front of the Pezinok station, the train conductor found a human head in the toilet separated from the hull. Within a short time, all 287 people traveling by train were identified, but none of the passengers provided any specific information on the perpetrator or victim. At the same time, there was no doubt that the head was brought into the train while the train was running. A tour of the entire railway line found not only the body or other parts of the body, but also no usable traces. The case was complicated by the finding of bloodied overalls in a freight train sent the same day from Bratislava to Budapest. The discovery of the head and bloodied overalls excited the entire Czechoslovak public at the time. The next day, during searches of missing persons, criminal investigators came across a man named Ambroz Ščepka at the Balara's apartment in the Trnava district. The absence of this man was reported to the police in Trnava by his girlfriend, Irena Cubírkovà. By comparing the latest photographs of the living Ambroz Ščepka with a photograph with a found head, taken at forensic medicine, his identity was safely established. Because Cubírkovà became insecure, nervous and gave the impression that she was hiding something after the questions of criminal investigators around the person of Ambroz Ščepka and her relationship with him, a house search was carried out in her apartment. However, the inspection of the apartment did not bring any information that Ščepka was murdered in his apartment. It wasn't until he left that a detective inadvertently touched the oven in which he had previously baked bread and found it to be very hot. However, Cubírkova's son definitely denied baking bread. So there was a suspicion. During the next interrogation, Cubírkovà could not explain why she was drowning in the bread oven. She became more and more entangled in her statement, until she folded everything and spontaneously confessed to the murder of her friend. She cited Ščepka's alcoholism, constant quarrels, unhappy family relations and a deep and lasting breakdown in relations with Ščepka as the motive for her murderous actions. On the day of the murder, on December 7, 1964, Ambroz Ščepka celebrated the name day and drank alcohol constantly during the day. In the evening, together with Irena Cubírkovà, he went to visit his neighbors and continued drinking there. When they returned home around 9:30 in the evening, he was so drunk that he fell from his chair and lay still. Cubírkovà took the axe and hit Ščepka twice in the head with the blunt side of the axe. Then she used a meat cleaver, an axe and a knife to separate her head from her torso. She pushed the hull into the furnace and started a fire. After the act, she put her head in a jute bag and hid it. Then she carefully removed all traces of the bloody event. She heated in the oven for a total of 35 hours. Then she swept the ash from the kiln and passed it through a sieve. She buried larger bones in a barn and tossed the rest of the ashes into a trash bucket and placed them in the garden. Shortly afterwards, she borrowed a bag from her neighbors, put her head in the bag and covered it with a blouse from overalls. Even with her bag, she went to the then MNV and announced the missing of her friend. Then she went to Trnava, where she got off. She waited until the train to Bratislava was ready for departure, placed the bag with her head on the toilet of the passenger train and dropped the overalls on the freight car. After that, she went to the police in Trnava to report her friends missing again. She returned home by another train. When asked by investigators why she decided to separate her head from her torso, burn her torso and lay her head on the toilet confidently, it was her revenge. The murdered man, maliciously drunk, threatened Cubírkovà by cutting off his head once, which she then threw into the toilet. Almost at the end of the investigation into the murder of Ambroz Ščepka, it was found that Irena Cubírkova's husband, Ján Čubírek, died while moving the stove, which fell on him when he carried them from the ground to the ground floor. The event took place more than 13 years ago before the murder of Ambroz Ščepka in Trutnov. That is why the criminal investigators decided to re-examine the death of Ján Čubírek. The remains of Ján Čubírek were exhumed, lifted from the grave, and experts proved that his death was caused by repeated blows with a blunt object into the head, which had to be performed by another person. At the same time, it was also ruled out that these deadly and repeated blows could cause the stove. The result of a complex investigation was the indictment of Irena Cubìrkovà for another murder. From 1945 to August 15, 1959, Irena Cubìrkovà lived in Trutnov. Until his death on October 10, 1951, her husband Ján also lived in a common household with Cubìrkovà in Trutnov. At the same time, Cubìrkovà maintained an intimate relationship with another man who was married. Čubírek came to infidelity and even obtained proof. When he returned home unexpectedly, he found his wife's underpants stained with sperm. To be sure, he handed the panties over to the doctor, who confirmed the presence of sperm. Because mutual relations deteriorated sharply not only in the Cubìrkovà family, but also in the lover's family, Cubìrkovà decided to kill her husband. She even got an ally for her purpose, her lover and eventually his wife. She convinced her that there had never been anything between her husband and her, and Čubírek had invented everything. For the first time, Cubìrkovà tried to kill her husband by overdosing on a drug called flucid. Cubìrkovà's lover provided the drug for murderous purposes. Although Čubírek took the medicine, nothing happened to him. The drug was intended for the treatment of female discharge from the birth canal. The second plan was again drawn up by all three. He was supposed to be hanged. Čubírkovà was to lure her husband for a night walk through the woods, and at a predetermined place he was to be stunned by a lover with a stick from an ambush and then hung on a tree. The lover's wife provided the rope for hanging. The crime was not completed because Čubírek refused a night walk through the forest. The plan to kill was successful on October 10, 1951. Čubírek was incapacitated for work and intended to paint the furniture. The lover provided strong sleeping pills and a bottle of alcohol. They poured the medicine into alcohol. Čubírkovà's task was to provoke her husband to drink, and after falling asleep under the influence of alcohol and sleeping pills, his lover was supposed to kill him. Then the corpse was to be transferred to the hall under the stairs and the stove was dropped on the corpse. The plan, though relatively naive, became a reality. When Čubírek drank a good dose of alcohol, he felt sleepy and Čubírkovà took him to the bedroom, where he soon fell asleep. Then Čubírkovà's lover came and killed him with an unidentified object with blows to the head and left the apartment. Čubírkovà went to her lover's apartment and asked his wife to go help him with the dead man. The dead man was taken to the hall under the stairs, a stove was pulled out of the ground and Čubírkovà dropped them on the corpse. When everything was ready, she sent her 9-year-old daughter to wake her father. However, the daughter had to walk around the stairs where her dead father lay. When her daughter saw her father, she started screaming. A neighbor who came to the apartment and became convinced that the stove had actually fallen on Čubírkovà also responded to the screams. The summoned police and the medical service were satisfied with the explanation given by Čubírkovà and no further operations were performed. Čubírkovà dictated a pre-prepared and agreed course of events to the police report. Although the lover's wife later confided in her neighbor about Čubírek's violent death and the neighbor reported this fact to the police, no one paid any attention to Ján Čubírek's death. A thorough examination did not reveal the truth until 13 years later. Čubírkovà was sentenced to death and her lover to 15 years in prison. The lover's wife was not tried, her act was amnestied. Other women executed after 1918 were Olga Hepnerová, Marie Fikaová and Irena Liptakova.